think how many of them? 6. The area development, what do you call them again? Area council, and then by the time you now begin to talk about 36 states, and then the FCT, making 37, and then we look at the councillors spread across the country. So what do you think needs to be done to actually get us to this point, where we begin to at least get this kind of document that is being produced at the national level?
Thank you very much. I think overall, government at the national level, we try to publish data as we have it. You raised a point while you were asking Amojua about how data can be misrepresented. There have been a lot of misrepresentation with the data that is published. But I think the critical issue around this is understanding context. So what are the issues? I'll give you an example. Sometime, I think last month, we were at a public hearing at the National Assembly, and the Member of Parliament was asking a question. He said, why are we borrowing money to fund the budget if FIRS has generated up to 5 trillion naira? I mean, I was a bit embarrassed. But of course, I thought maybe he asked that question, maybe not for his education, but for people in the room, because it was a public hearing. Now, there are revenue sharing formula. Quite a number of us don't understand what these are. If, for instance, you hear FIRS, for example, publishing data around how much money they've collected in terms of VAT, everyone thinks that all of that money belongs to the federal government. No, it's just 15% of all VAT collections that comes to the federal government. The balance, 85%, goes to subnational. That means state and local government levels. Just to break it down, if the FIRS collects, say, 10 trillion naira today as VAT collections, just 1.5 trillion naira comes to the federal government. The balance, 8.5 trillion, goes to states and local governments in another different formula, which is 50% to states and 35% to LGA. Now, all of this conversation around subnational is good, but I think the real issue is local government autonomy. There's a lot that could happen that could trigger development if we go to, move the conversation around that. But coming back to your question, I think government has been publishing data, maybe not timely, in a haphazard way before now, but we had like a common ground that held us together, that helped us to look at our deliverables and what we need to do, which is the Open Government Partnership. In 2015 it was, I think, Mr. President signed up to the Open Government Partnership. Nigeria became the 70th member of the partnership, and basically it's just about open data, really. Government needs to be transparent, needs to be accountable to the people. The Open Government Partnership, or the National Action Plan, which Nigeria signed up to, has about 4 thematic areas and 14 commitments. The very first commitment in all of that is the open budget, and it, just like you said, requires that we publish the whole 8 key budget documents, that we engage with citizens during the budget cycle and all of that. And we as Budget Office of the Federation has tried in making this happen and engaging with the citizens and publishing data. And the next question is, how much of this data, like most of the speakers have said, do people understand? How can we engage as citizens or a citizens-based organization? How do we pick up this information in a way and manner that is useful to citizens, or translate them to our citizens-based group? I'll give a few examples. Budget has a sister agency called Tracker that looks at projects. The information we publish is what they use to do the community efforts that they do with Tracker. If you go up north close to, I think in Jigawa, they have a project monitoring partnership, and they are focused on constituency or projects within their locality in the federal budget. All of that information they glean from publications we make on our website. If you go to Kano, they have a group called the Budget Partners, and all they do is to take this information that we publish and make it useful to people in their locality. So Nigeria is a federating unit, right? And we have 774 local government, 36 states, 1 federal capital territory, and all of the councils and districts that we have. Now the reality is, as Budget Office of the Federation, there's a limit which you can go in making this happen, but of course we would have to leverage first on technology and then on citizens-based group and the people around us and people who are interested in this to pick up this information and make it into what can be useful to people around them as well.
I think, thank you. I think it's clear now. I think we can now go straight into our discussion. Right? I know you'll be wondering what I've been doing. Of course, we've been talking about open data and then government, and then we try to philosophize. I mean, we try to come up with some different philosophy around that. Just to explain how diverse the group is. You have people working, especially looking at investment. You got people actually looking at government, the efficiency around government. You have people looking generally at the business context and then the economy. You have people looking at enterprise and how they are interacting with especially open data. But the key question here is that how do we bring everything together to actually begin to drive development? And I'll put a little bit of context. In Nigeria, clearly, as we have it, by 2023, people are saying that it will era the end of the oil, we call it the fossil fuel economy that has been driving us. And we all understand that even despite the fact that we have oil today at maybe $72, most governments at subnational level are struggling. How can we now begin to leverage on what we've actually shared? I think let's maybe keep it short so that we can also take questions for the audience, from the audience. How can we begin to leverage on this concept to begin to actually change things from the subnational level? And the thinking is this, that between, of course, 1999 and today, that the biggest component of spending had happened at the subnational level. In fact, people estimate that about 52% of public spending had actually happened at subnational level. But the attention has always been on the national government. And of course, I'm also capable of looking at that. Of course, I focus my attention too much on the national government because we feel they spend awesomely. But something that happened at the subnational level, things around not ability to pay salaries, we begin to talk about minimum wage, a lot of arguments in that space. So as we transit into this 2023 that we are talking about, how can we leverage on what we've discussed already to begin to drive development at subnational level? I don't think this is going to be a question. I think it's going to be an open conversation where we'll actually exchange ideas. I think maybe we'll start from the special advisor on investment, among others. Yeah, Mr. K.
So, the fundamental question, I think, is what kind of federation are we running, right? And you can't run away from that debate, right? So, today you have a national minimum wage signed into law by the president. Automatically, across the 36 states, regardless of the fiscal state of any of those states, workers in those states expect to be paid that minimum wage. I can bet you, maybe not my left arm, maybe my shoes and my wristwatch, that in the next 3 months, you're going to find a raft of strikes and union activities, and people are going to say they are not working because their state governors are not honoring an agreement, right? So, that's the, if you don't solve that problem, right, where a federal government can effectively create an obligation for the states, right, then it tells you that your federation is skewed, is dodgy, right? Because the states the state should be able to determine, this is how much I can pay. Now that's one. On the second hand, look at your tax policies as a country, right? So states should be able to determine their investment strategy as subnational units. I should say, sir, as governor of Ekiti State, perhaps what we want to do here is, for argument's sake, abolish payroll taxes, right? Because we want the best workers to come and work in Ekiti. If they raise the productivity of the state, we'll earn our revenues from land charges, etc. We'll find a way to balance it out. States don't have that flexibility. So, you cannot call it a federation where the states are in a 100-meter race, and they're running with bags of lead, right? So it's very difficult for us to say, how do we win the nation off an oil-based economy? Because everything around our fiscal structure, right, is tied towards going to Abuja once a month. That activity is the most important activity in governance at subnational level outside of Lagos, right?
Yeah.
So, no, just 1 minute. So that's the problem. Now, until you address that issue, right, everything you say here is theoretical. First, let's establish that. Now, but if we were to say that issue was addressed, properly, states need to hold on to what you call centers of excellence, right? So, I mean, I always say, like, we can't compete on the same things, right? So Ogun State is close to Lagos. You know, there's a strategy for states that are close to large commercial sites, right? The spin-off from places, real estate, taxes, manufacturing businesses, etc. That's your strategy. Maybe an Ekiti State strategy is that, look, we've got a ton of professors, right? If you walk into a house in Ekiti, you're likely to find a professor. Maybe the argument there is to leverage that knowledge economy and say, you know, this is the place for universities to be cited, this is the place for secondary schools to be cited. But how do you do that if you do not control the tax structure that attracts the best lecturers and the best teachers to the states? So the conversation is really, look, the federation we're running is not primed for growth or development, right? You need people, the governors who are focused on growth, who are focused on development, don't even necessarily get the recognition they deserve. So there's no way where, for example, there's a peer review or there's a ranking system that says, well, on fiscal responsibility, this is where you are. You know, on project delivery, this is where you are. Look, we've seen, I mean, let's be honest, right? I mean, I'm a politician, but I'm a bit politically incorrect. You know, there are people who have run governments from outside their states, right?
Yes.
There's no consequence for that. 4 years later, they come up, they campaign for 3 weeks, they get voted back into office. So you know, part of the work, to be honest, one part is citizen engagement, which, you know, budget and, you know, a few other civil society institutions are trying to drive. But I think the second part is the structure of the federation, right? If you do not give the federation the kind of flexibility for the leadership at subnational levels to think about the solutions to their specific problems, right, then we're stuck in this rut.
Oh, Michael, you're an economist, and I always argue, of course, I can actually come in and then begin to argue around that we already have an existing structure. And to change that structure, you need some political dynamism to it. I think he made mention of that. But in the atmosphere of what we presently have now, we understand that if we look at the tax structure that I was talking about, the state are actually taking, technically, well, subnational governments should take 100% of VAT. But I know the federal government retains 15% for other reasons and other things like that. And then you have issues around CIT, company income tax. And people even complain that the CIT rate is too high, it's too low. What do we do? I mean, we saw Ghana actually say, no, we are going into productivity. We want to increase production. We are not looking at taxation for now. And a whole lot of argument. And they always say that if you put, of course, if you put two economists in a room, of course, they will most likely come up with 3 concepts. And they will still disagree with the concept. What do you say about this? How do we move from here?
Yeah, thank you. I definitely agree that fundamentally a feeding bottle federalism isn't a good idea. But I'm also from the school of thought that Nigeria's problems are not difficult. Our solutions tend to be difficult. I'm going to highlight a couple of low-hanging fruits, right, when it comes to open data and addressing that. The first is looking at the states. Only about half of the states in this country have their own statistics bureau. So the NBS deals with federal statistics and has state data, but only about half of the states actually have their own statistics bureau. This essentially means that half of our states don't know anything about the people living there. The reality is that it doesn't matter who the governor is, who the cabinet is, doesn't matter who's there, you are blind. I think someone spoke about walking in the dark, right? So that is a very simple thing to solve. Statistics bureaus are not that expensive to run. Researchers don't command such high salaries, as you probably know. But this has been the case for years, and I bet will be the case for many more years. The NBS has made fantastic strides because of the person in charge. There is a serious possibility that when Dr. Kale leaves, we are going to regress because the systems are not in place. Now, again, we're going to be walking blind nationally. So that's the first one, right? Establish state statistics bureaus and fund them. Because then states can collect data, publish data, and development agencies can look at the data and decide we want to support schools in Kano versus Jigawa because now we know the school rates, and so on. Right? At the moment, even people that want to help are coming in behind. The second thing is our favorite, the oil sector. I think that sector makes a mockery of open data in general, right? The NMPC, and apologies for anyone here who may work or know anyone that works there, I have no problem with you, but I do have a problem with the institution. Publishing a December 2017 monthly report in February 2019 is not transparency. Publishing the report in non-machine readable formats is not transparency, right? So you're just playing around. Now, obviously, that sector is highly politicized, and I wonder if that's even more difficult to change than our federalism structure. But again, and we were discussing this earlier, but if you begin to tackle that sector and properly drive open data there, that sector is so key to the economy that you unlock other things, right? I think the last time the NBS said that about 50% of the economy is indirectly linked to the oil sector. So once you shine a light in that sector, few people can hide. The third thing is, again, look at major institutions in the country. One of my recent favorites is INEC, because we just had elections. It's quite incredible that data on election results, which arguably should be the most public data there is so difficult to get. If I want to find out the number of votes a House of Reps candidate in a local government in Katsina won, I will not be able to find that out. They have the data, but they will refuse to give it to you. And I'm speaking from experience here, guys, because when we built our site to visualize results and we approached them for 2015 data, we got a lot of pushback, and I know budget was also involved in that process, right? So when you have INEC, that should be the paragon of data transparency, acting that way, you have NMPC, you have the states governments that lack data bureaus, we are wasting that time, right? Go for the low-hanging fruits. We don't have to start dealing with small businesses or LGAs. Go for the low-hanging fruits, the big boys up there. Let them sort themselves out, and that's how the culture can change. That's the first step.
I think that's at the heart of it. Now it gets difficult when we move away, when you try to actually bring politics. And then, of course, you try to actually put politics and then economics together. And then the willingness, of course, the question of the willingness to actually begin to take a certain decision. But I want to ask a question. I mean, we'll all travel outside, we try to travel outside the country and we see how things operate. And then one of the benefits that the European Union has actually pushed out is around efficiency in government, which is at the heart of what we are discussing. Because the more efficient a government is, the better, of course, we get, you get improved service delivery. And as you get improved service delivery, it begins to impact on the life of citizens, and then things begin to scale up. The European Union actually felt that the moment they open up their data around where you park your cars and many other factors like that, the numbers is simple. In 2018, they were able to save about 7,000 lives just by opening up data. And then in terms of hours saved, they said it's 629 million hours that was saved just within government coffers. Of course, we are talking about 520-something million people. Of course, they are more than Nigeria, but the European Union. So my question is this. Within the social value system, and it's actually directed at you so that we don't have the panel actually tilting towards us. Within the social value system that we have, of course, when you're trying to cross the road, somebody is trying to knock you over. We know the policies and the law says that, of course, you have the right of way as pedestrian in Nigeria. Of course, you know what I'm saying. Within the value system that we have now in this country, how do we begin to use leverage on these things? Leverage on especially issues around information that is mentioned. It's difficult, I know, but we have to find a middle ground. Some of this information are available. For instance, the crime rate you could actually begin to plot some things. If you look at the MBS numbers, it begins to tell you, within this community, you have more accidents, you have people being knocked down, among others. How do we begin to leverage on this information to begin to shape the norm we have in our society? And then, more importantly, how do we take our advocacy even beyond what we always and normally will do, which is, make the data available, make the data, to begin to see and begin to create demand for this data.
So
with the overall intention of actually shaking the norm.
Your questions are very fat.
Of course, they are broad.
Now, the question is, how do you leverage on zero? Because you just mentioned that 50% of our states they are planning and working in the dark. And that's what happens, because whatever the person does, 2-3 years later, it's all a mess. I have engaged a politician before who said that he was running to be governor and he needed my assistance. And as I asked him, so can I see your manifesto? He said, can you help me work on one? And that's a true story. I mean, thankfully, the person never became governor, but that's a true story. And I don't think that's an abnormal story. We know a lot of governors that work from Abuja because there is no incentive for him. I almost said her, unfortunately, no her yet. There's no incentive for him to even stay in the state because the closest point of getting money is Abuja. So in the commonsensical way of thinking, it's actually good for him to be in Abuja so that he doesn't have to travel every month. He collects the money, he wires it back to the state, the ones that he wants to dash the state. It's funny, but so we need to understand that that's the point. We're playing from the point of darkness. The first battle is the battle for data itself, quality data. There's a training video on the internet right now. An active, alive, and kicking Nigerian minister of labor said that Nigeria has a surplus of doctors. Yeah. And when he was challenged, he did what the average person does. He spoke to his personal experience of knowing a doctor that has established centers at home. But Nigeria is short by about 250,000 doctors. That's massive. But the disaster wasn't even that the person was saying that we have more than enough doctors, so it's natural for us to export. That's not as bad as the fact that from the video you could see that this guy wasn't trying to be a bad person. He actually has no clue. And that if he was lying, I would have been more grateful. That, oh, this guy is lying. This guy actually has no clue that the country where he is a cabinet member as the Minister of Labor is shot by some 250,000 doctors. And he's sitting down there very confident and saying, well, you have more than enough. And it's actually making sense from a certain point of view. If you have too many doctors, it's natural to export. But unfortunately, this is a country that should be importing doctors based on his logic because we are 250,000 short. We need to normalize data so that people like that can actually see it easily. So the challenge of data is not even just for people that are outside government, it's also for people that are inside government. It is not yet normal to know the numbers. So I can do an experiment right now. If you give me 1 minute, these are supposed to be the data people, right? So let me just quickly do something. Please be fast so I don't waste time, right? There is a question that everybody, Nigerians and non-Nigerians, have a different answer to. And that's the question of Nigeria's population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Over 140 million, over 200 million, 190 million. Of course, all of them are right because you say it according to how you feel.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very valid point that the reality of the ground is that the data we use for planning I think it's well, I mean, it's explicitly said that the data we use for planning, the data we use for planning is on this side. And then when you make decision based on actually false information, definitely you get false results. I mean,
But the point,
Start from one point. Sorry, Akin. Sorry, 1 minute. We need to start from one point that we are winging it.
okay.
I improvise any. We are improvising everything. We are playing in the dark. We are assuming everything. Somebody becomes governor, and he or she, sorry, we need to have female governors, right? And he's just thinking, okay, I have this idea. I have this. None of those things is informed by the reality. And what's the reality? The reality is data. The reality is not the road on my the road on the way to my house is bad. That's your personal experience. The reality is not we don't have any school in this part of the city. That's your personal experience. When we get to that reality, that's when we start to understand why a state like Lagos can decide VAT is going to be 15%. A state like it can say, we don't want to take VAT for now. Because the reality will feed into your reality, your individual, subnational reality. We can't even have that conversation because as a country, we don't even have a reality in terms of data. We just have a perceptive reality. Nigerians are poor. Where are they?
I think, I mean, yeah, I think yes. We could agree, we could disagree based on that perception. But also sometimes we actually still make error of judgment. I mean, in judgment. And just to leave it, I mean, just to put a little bit of context to this. I remember having a conversation with somebody that actually started a business. And the business was about, a particular store in Lagos actually likes selling hot bread. And as such, I want to set up hot bread. And he had a wonderful idea. He did the population, saw the houses, did the calculation, came up with data, and then make a conclusion that if I set up my store in this particular location, I'm going to sell. Unfortunately, after 6 months, the business was bankrupt. Why? Demographic shift. He was actually looking at the population, but not minding the fact that it's young people that like eating, the old people. So he actually made that error. So I just want to ask you a question. Enterprise, what they've been discussing, how do you think, when do we think government data will become very useful? I mean, you mentioned the fact that there are capacity issues, even within the enterprise space. But there's also the context of these data are not genuine. And we've seen that play out, and I think I was in a forum somewhere in Ogun State where they were talking about open data in southwestern Nigeria. And people were actually even interrogating the numbers. The total number of people in this school is actually false. That some of these things are actually manufactured data. In fact, people will even put question mark among other things. How do you think enterprise will begin to actually appreciate data, one? And how do you think we can actually begin to build that? Because where we are going, we want a society, irrespective of the challenges we are facing, we want a society where our children could actually feel live in a more inclusive society that is actually development driven. And of course, having that data culture. So I'm asking the question, where do we get to that point where government data is being respected by the enterprise, and enterprise make informed decisions based on those data, and they get results? And what are the things you think we need to actually put in place together so that we begin to actually take this home?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to respond in different ways. We have a lot of times, and I'll give perspective and I'll try to paint a picture and give examples. We had a government funding partner we do have a government funding partner who, for the entrepreneurs to be able to access the loans or the funds, they need to have their businesses registered. And the government says that your business should be registered within 24 to 48 hours, I think, right? Yeah. But we've never seen that happen. We've never ever seen that happen. That is a serious problem. So now you say that there's available funding for entrepreneurs. All you need to do is get trained and then ensure that your business is registered so that we are paying these monies into registered accounts, business accounts. But the entrepreneurs, the shortest time it took any of them to register their business was about a month. And it wasn't because they didn't have the requirements, it wasn't because they didn't meet the requirements, they didn't have the documentation and all of that, they did. But the process is just it's just like he was saying, the process is just, it's chaotic. It's chaotic, and a lot of them pulled out after, well, they just said, you know what, I already have the knowledge on how to run a business and run it successfully in Nigeria. I think that's fine for me. When I'm able to register my business, you know, properly with the CAC, then that will be fine for me. So one of the things we decided to do is say, how can we engage the government better and make them more accountable? To say, if you have set up a program for entrepreneurs to be able to access funding and you want to train them first, how can we ensure that they have clearer KPIs in terms of targets? What are you measuring after now? You're saying that they won't be able to access the funds until their businesses are registered. How are you ensuring that that happens? How are you ensuring that they can get their businesses registered within the 48 hours that you have said? So on our own end, we're also engaging the government to say, going forward, when you set up a program for entrepreneurs, for example, how can you influence the regulators to ensure that these things are done and are done quickly? We realized 3 or 4 years ago, we set up a unit within Faith Foundation, the Research and Policy Unit. And what we wanted to do with that unit was to get information on research on supporting startups, and then use that information to influence or improve our curriculum design for these entrepreneurs. And then once we did that, we started to engage other stakeholders in terms of the report that we had gotten from that. And we realized that a lot of entrepreneurs were now, or businesses were now having issues with regulators, FIRS, NAFDAC, CAC, and they can't get these things. So their businesses cannot move forward with this. We have a lot of businesses that require NAFDAC registration numbers. Sometime, I think in 2015, we had a policy dialogue when we brought in all the stakeholders within the SME space, the marketplace entrepreneurs themselves, and the policymakers and the regulators. And we allowed them to go first to talk. And at that time, there was some funding that was available, I think, from the central bank, I think. And we allowed them to go first, and then the disbursing arms were also on the panel, talking about how easy it is to access this funding. All you need to do is fill this form and fill that form, and voila, you have the funding. And then we gave the audience the right to speak. And someone stood up and said, okay, so the NAFDAC representative had said that, oh, it's very easy. All you need to do is pay for this, and your file moves from here to here to here, and you get your registration number, and we come and vet your facility and all of that. And then someone in the audience stood up to say, I've been trying to get a NAFDAC registration number for 2 years. 2 years now, and they keep telling me that I'm from, and this is a normal, and we see it every time in different sectors. For your file to be able to move from desk A to desk B, something must
happen. I think yes, because of yes, I think it's clear that enterprise and government, there needs to be that trust. You have to build that trust before we can begin to have that discussion about the layer of information that the enterprise will need to make informed decisions. And then more importantly also, I understand that even within government coffers, I mean within government itself, there's even struggle to even aggregate data. I don't know, I don't want to put him on the spot, but I can throw it at you. I should put you on the spot. Okay, great. We understand we have close to 800 MDAs, and each of them generate their own different data. And by the time you approach a government agency that is in charge of aggregating some of those data, they hit brick walls. Those MDAs actually create walls for themselves. Some of them, the quality of the data they even send to those centers is actually questionable, and which come up with a lot of issues. So, Alfred, I know you've actually been facing some of these challenges. Of course, you can admit it on them or deflate it. But within the government coffers, and as he has actually also rightly put in, there's an issue of trust. There's a big issue with trust, even at the national level. With respect to the data that is government actually producing. What measures do you think we'll need to actually put in place going forward? I think the problem, we know the problems. We need to begin to move to solutions. And I understand that in 2000 and, I think in 2013 or something like that, we came up with this open data policy, which is almost similar to what happened, what had played out at subnational level, maybe in Edo State, where you had a way of actually venting some of this data. And what experience can you share with us on how to actually transit, especially at subnational level? Because we understand that some governments, it's not uncommon to see a state government with revenue in the region of about 50 billion, making making statements that is planning to spend 1 trillion. Those credibility issues actually hang in the balance. What candid advice can you actually give to us, especially for people seated here, on how to actually move this project forward? Because as everybody have rightly put up today, that before we start seeing development, we need to begin to make right decisions. And those right decisions can only be backed, can only be made when we have right data. But there's a challenge. How do we get those right data?
Thank you very much. A couple of questions in this one question. But I'll start off from the point where you said, what you said about data sitting in different cycles. What we're trying to do in government right now is to bring all of those under one roof. MDS is doing a lot of work, but for instance, we understand what the problem is with revenues, for example. I'll use that as an example. Michael did mention that the oil sector, for example, is a low-hanging fruit. Why is that? The Nigerian economy, if you looked at the numbers from NBS, you realize that the oil sector is just about 10%, less than 10% of our GDP. That tells you that the economy in itself is diversified. But in reality, oil revenues contribute to more than 60% of government revenues, okay? And close to, or if not over 80% of our forex earnings. So it puts us in a very tight space where if anything goes wrong in that sector, everyone catches cold. So we've come to the point where the first step is what can we do to make things better? And the current Minister of Finance is driving what we call the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, which is looking at non-oil revenues. How do we leverage on the numbers we have? How do we leverage the numbers to see what can be done? What efficiency can we put in place to boost custom collections, to boost FIRS collections, to do all of these things? Now, the baseline data we have are conflicting, like you said. If you go to CBN publication, you can find a number that's different from what you find in our space, and you find something different from what you find in OEGF space. OEGF, by the way, is Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. So the administration thought it was nice to come together and have like one standpoint of truth, which is like a reconciled data point, and they set up this Presidential Revenue Reconciliation and Monitoring Committee. Now, that committee is looking at revenue collections from all of the revenue actors in the space. And the number of OEGF, the number in Budget Office, and the number in CBN, and the number quoted by FIRS need to speak to each other. Now, we're going back in time, at least to the point of 1999. All of these numbers have been reconciled to a point where we are comfortable with, and everyone agrees with the numbers. The reality is, we're cleaning it up, okay? And we're getting to a point where the data you will find in government cycle will just be one source of truth. Whether you go to Ministry of Finance, or you come to Budget Office, or you go to CBN or OEGF, the information you will get moving forward, and that work is still ongoing, by the way, will be one source of truth. And for me, that's a starting point, because a lot of people, you can do your research based on information available to you, say from CBN, and it doesn't cover the whole picture because they are missing some information or another, additional information from the Treasurer, which is the OAGF, for example. So in itself, that's pretty much, the issues that we're dealing with. There's a lot of things in government that I'm not very proud of, information sitting on someone's desktop, but that's in the next few months will be a thing of the past. And I'd like to have a conversation with her after the session, because I'm surprised to hear that someone can't register a business in a month. To be honest, it's something you can do. It's something you can actually do online now. I have a couple of people who have done it online. Yeah, so that.
Questions from the audience. I have 1,000,001 question that is still hanging on my table that we can continue forever to ask. But at least let's just throw this open. I think we are going to give priorities to the ladies first. So I'm going to take 5 ladies before I take a man. Any question? 5:1, that's what we are going to do here. Why are you asking me why? I make the rule and then I decide what happened. We are not doing participatory government here. So I think let's take from here. I'm only joking, so we throw the question around.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Francesca Chiedu. So it's a very interesting conversation, but I think I've been trying to struggle with the data question because we have NIMC, the National Identity Management Commission, and I've been waiting for maybe someone throwing more light as to why we've not made so much progress with NIMC. And I'm not sure why that's, but you know we have all these conspiracy theories that believe that there are people who deliberately do not want that organization that is backed by law to function. So for those like Michael, you do a lot of work around data research, engaging organizations like NIMC, and how have we been able to, and even for budget, engage these institutions to see that we really have data come to life? Because we've had the organization since 2007, and it looks like no one takes them seriously. But I'm beginning to hear that some banks and even immigration will soon insist that if you don't have the NIN number, you can't get your ID card. But I think one progress we may likely make is seeing how we really have in our national data truly captured, just the way the BVN worked, we can truly get the NIN to eventually work. So it will help if any panel could throw more lights on maybe work they've done gauging NIMC. Thank you.
Let's take the second question so that we can actually move fast.
Okay, my name is Semia Taderibigbe. My question is to Mr. Akintunde Oyebode. I'm currently serving in Ekiti, and I noticed that most of the governance, all the policies, activities happen in Ado Ekiti. So as a core member, I feel almost left out because programs that are supposed to be engaging people like us are not brought to where we are, and we can't move easily according to NYSC. So my question now is, if we are talking state of states, are we talking about the state comprehensively, or we are looking at the state capital alone?
I think that's a politically coined question. let's have him. So let's have him. I remember.
Okay, my name is Ife Okumoren from Akwa Ibom. My question goes directly to Otiku and budget as a whole. I remember my time at Policy Alert. We actually worked on open budgeting for the Akwa Ibom state budget, and unfortunately, we had the privilege of Akwa Ibom being one of those states that runs an IPSAS model budget. But we got a shock of our life at some point when we had to go to the sub-national, that's the local government. And we discovered something that looked very funny. We had 2 local governments that have almost similar names, Esedeket and Eket, and we discovered that, in fact, the only difference in their budget was just the front cover. So if you go to Esedeket budget, what you see is, okay. And so we were forced to, I can't remember his name, is it Ade something? So my ED then, Tija Bolton, we had to engage budget, and we bought the course for some training. And so I can agree less with Oge that even with some of the data that we have, we don't seem to do enough with the few data that we have. And that seems to be my concern too, just like Oge has said. And so my question would be to budget. What are you guys doing You know, yes, at policy, as an organization, it cost us a fortune because we're just trying to get our feet to, you know, bring down 2 of your guys to do some training for us, especially in the areas of infographics. And of course, today, I can gladly say that our efforts has, you know, yielded fruit. Today, we have a citizen budget in Akwa Ibom State, and then we are always on the table around commissions about open budget in the states. But I would want you, as an organization that has built capacity and strength, to see how you can, you know, do a sort of TOT, so that you can have more voices on what Oge is talking about, and on how citizens and maybe organizations that are working around open budget issues, you know, can amplify the voices that you already have. You know, budget is almost like a lone voice and tracker. So, but the truth is that when you have more organizations who have built capacity, who are able to analyze data and are able to speak to these issues, you know, you could. So I want to ask, what efforts, you know, are you guys doing in that regards?
I think let's take the first 3 questions. Right. The first one talks about the national identity. The second one is about Ekiti and why everything is in Ado Ekiti and not all the other local governments. And then the third one talks about demand for the.
So let me take the second one first. I mean, to be honest, you know, for me, the first thing I did when I got to Ekiti was at least go to all the 16 local governments. So me, I'm from Ikole, so I won't have a sentimental reason to ensure that development spreads outside of Ekiti. The challenge is that the baseline in Ekiti State is that it's not a very industrial state at the moment, right? That's the work that we have to start now. So that's the baseline, that's the departure point. You know, so it's as simple as even if you were going to do a digital skills training for 200 people. I mean, the reality is that there are some local governments where you don't get broadband, right? I have had to change my mobile phone. I'm going to do it today now from 9 Mobile, apologies if you are a 9 Mobile staff, to MTN, because 9 Mobile has so many blind spots, even in Ado Ekiti, the federal capital. So how do you do digital skills training in a place where there's no broadband connectivity? You know, so some of the work we're trying to do today is to say, let's even start by taking connectivity to 4 or 5 local governments. So to Oye, for example, where there's a federal university, to Ikole, where there's some tertiary education presence. You know, start there, build the business case with that, and then encourage the providers to say, okay, let's start going to other outposts. Ekiti State as a whole gets 28 megawatts of electricity, right? 28 megawatts. I'm not sure it can power, yes, that cannot power 2 floors of this hotel, right? So those are the challenges that we're dealing with today. We have 1 tractor to clear land across the state, 1. You said, but that's the starting point. It's good to recognize the starting point. So your point is absolutely valid. Now, what will be a disaster, and I certainly will not be in my job, if in a year from now, a youth corps member comes back and says exactly what you said. I can guarantee you that that's going to change. Absolutely. One of the first things we're doing is we're taking a microcredit and enterprise development program across the states. What we've charged the person in charge of that to do is to even ensure that he has presence in each of the local governments, right? Even if it's 2 people, just have presence in each of the local governments. Look, I mean, I say this with all sense of, you know, this is not a joke. When we ran the Employment Trust Fund in Lagos, there's no local government in Lagos State that will say we didn't benefit from the fund. We had liaison offices in every local government. That's where representation starts from, right? So that one we're going to do. You know, it's a very easy question to answer. In a year from now, our goal is to say, cashew, in Ikole, in Oye, you can do cashew because it's up north, it's close to Kwara. You know, in the south, we'll have other produce that we can focus on there. So development is going to spread across Ekiti. Of that, I have no doubt, right? It's going to take some time, but it's going to happen. Now, the other point around NIMSI very quickly is that, look, what you don't spend money on doesn't grow, right? It's a very simple question in my perspective. You know, the question is, for you as a citizen who's interested in NIMSI, is to tie NIMSI's budget, right, to performance, right? The reality is that if you do not resource that institution properly, how do they go and capture data of, we don't even know how many we are, over 100 million people, right? It's going to be a very difficult exercise. So for me, the real challenge is, yes, everybody says, oh, NIMSI should be driving, you know, identity management, but are they sufficiently resourced to deliver on that mandate? For me, I don't think the answer is yes.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of things in Nigeria start and end with money. and definitely NIMSI doesn't have the funding. I do think the funding issue should be relatively easy to solve, right? Because if you identify this as a priority, again, the money is available. It still baffles me that we've not done another census, right? Because whether or not you are saying that you're spending 50 billion on this road or this bridge, you are wasting your time. Take that money and spend it on a census so at least you know what you are doing, right? So this discussion of we don't have money, I look at it, the budget is what, 9 trillion naira or something like that, and you're borrowing about 3 trillion naira. What part of this is dedicated to data collection, a census, right? Before we get to even NIMSI, right? The other issue is that you touched on incentives. The reality is that if you look at the problem, it is multidimensional in that people in Lagos, a lot of us are over-identified, right? You probably have a BVN, driver's license, voter's card, tax card, you have passports, you know, you have ECOWAS passport, you have yellow card, you have all sorts of identification, right? Lots of these databases are sitting separately, right? Some of them, again, are not machine readable, they are paper and pen. So when it's time to transfer or compare, it's nearly impossible. But at the same time, you have a large subset of people that are under-identified. They're ghosts. They don't exist, right? So you are trying to solve two problems at the same time, right? For me, the easier one is the first, right? You have these databases, right? First of all, digitize them. That's straightforward. Once you digitize them, it gets very easy to aggregate and compare and then weed out any problems. And this is what the finance ministry did in 2007, 8, I can't remember, where they just aggregated a lot of the public sector databases, and because of that, they were able to weed out a lot of ghost workers, right? So that's the first step before you then start to figure out how to capture the people that are ghosts right now.
Okay, so because of time, we just have to close this section. I think special thanks to the panelists, Moge, Akintunde, Omojua, Michael, Alfred, and of course, everybody on the panel. So thank you. So do you want to take a picture?
Please, a quick group pictures, please. Enjoy.